Human rights are not a privilege granted by the few, they are a liberty entitled to all, and human rights, by definition, include the rights of all humans, those in the dawn of life, the dusk of life, or the shadows of life. From the beginning of our history the country has been afflicted with compromise. It is by compromise that human rights have been abandoned. The respect for human rights is nowadays not so much a matter of having international standards, but rather questions of compliance with those standards. Free expression is the base of human rights, the root of human nature and the mother of truth. To kill free speech is to insult human rights, to stifle human nature and to suppress truth. Poverty is the absence of all human rights. The frustrations, hostility and anger generated by abject poverty cannot sustain peace in any society. Global markets must be balanced by global values such as respect for human rights and international law, democracy, security and sustainable economic and environmental development. It cannot be right in a world of increasing human progress, whether in medicine, space exploration or renewable energy, that so many people are denied the most basic human rights. The core of human rights work is naming and shaming those who commit abuses, and pressuring governments to put the screws to abusing states. As a result, human rights conventions are unique among international law instruments in depending for their enforcement mostly on the activism of a global civil society movement. When it comes to racism, discrimination, corruption, public lies, dictatorships, and human rights, you have to take a stand as a reporter because I think our responsibility as journalists is to confront those who are abusing power. Sometimes, I am also identified as a civil rights leader or a human rights activist. I would also like to be thought of as a complex, three-dimensional, flesh-and-blood human being with a rich storehouse of experiences, much like everyone else, yet unique in my own way, much like everyone else. Emancipation from every kind of bondage is my principle. I go for recognition of human rights, without distinction of sect, party, sex, or color. There is no room for legal hairsplitting when it comes to the humane treatment of detainees, not in a nation founded on the rule of law and respect for human rights. Governments that block the aspirations of their people, that steal or are corrupt, that oppress and torture or that deny freedom of expression and human rights should bear in mind that they will find it increasingly hard to escape the judgment of their own people, or where warranted, the reach of international law. Republican patience with how unionism deals with the political institutions, and with key issues like equality and human rights, will be tested because, obviously, there will be a battle a day on these matters. So let's face up to all of this with our eyes wide open. I heard an Israeli speaking on Palestinian human rights issues, an interesting guy, and he said, there's no military solution to terrorism. If there were, Israel would be the safest place in the world. But there's no military solution. Democracy, pure democracy, has at least its foundation in a generous theory of human rights. It is founded on the natural equality of mankind. It is the cornerstone of the Christian religion. It is the first element of all lawful government upon earth. I stated that Aboriginals deserve protection under Canada's human rights laws and that the record dollars that the government is spending on Aboriginals should reach the people in need. We want the world our children inherit to be defined by the values enshrined in the UN Charter: peace, justice, respect, human rights, tolerance, and solidarity. The stories from Iran's present and past are reminders that freedom, democracy and human rights, or fundamentalism, fascism and terrorism are not geographically and culturally determined, but universal. In a world of increasing inequality, the legitimacy of institutions that give precedence to the property rights of the haves over the human rights of the have-nots is inevitably called into serious question. Poverty must be eradicated, the resources of our planet used sustainably, human rights respected, equality between men and women strengthened, HIV, AIDS and other diseases prevented, terrorism stopped, and disarmament and non-proliferation secured. When we achieve human rights and human dignity for all people, they will build a peaceful, sustainable, and just world. Clearly, the response to terrorism and violent extremism must respect human rights and comply with international law. That is not just a question of justice but of effectiveness. America's support for human rights and democracy is our noblest export to the world. Let me reassure that the Kingdom of Cambodia, a country with independence, neutrality, peace, freedom, democracy and human rights as you all have seen, shall be existing with no end. I was a human rights lawyer for 20 years, I believed those values of dignity, equality, and non-discrimination were a given. Believed the only question in my lifetime would be, how much further do we extend those values? I did not think in my lifetime we'd actually be having an argument about those values. A commitment to human rights cannot be fostered simply through the transmission of knowledge. Action and experience play a crucial role in the learning process. Privacy is not for sale, and human rights should not be compromised out of fear or greed. Black-on-black crime is a massive human rights issue that's going on in America. The biggest roadblock to action on genocide and other human rights crimes is ignorance. Most people just don't know that such things are happening, and often, if they have a vague idea they are happening, there is a feeling that there is nothing that can be done to stop these crimes. Human trafficking robs victims of their basic human rights, and it occurs right under our noses. Many efforts have been focused in other regions of the world, but this is a major problem here at home. Investing in women's lives is an investment in sustainable development, in human rights, in future generations, and consequently in our own long-term national interests. I do a number of things working on human rights issues, prison recidivism rates, and then I also push and have worked a lot on the social issues of rebuilding the family. The barometer for judging the character of people, in regard human rights, is now those who consider themselves gay, homosexual, lesbian. The judgment as to whether you can trust the future, the social advancement, depending on people, will be judged on where they come out on that question. Human rights is a universal standard. It is a component of every religion and every civilization. We've been in the nation-building business since World War I, and especially since World War II. The goal is not a Jeffersonian democracy in Afghanistan, but a representative government that respects human rights, protects its own people, and is a friend of the West. These are very realistic, and necessary, goals. Human rights must work to uplift human dignity. In a few decades, the relationship between the environment, resources and conflict may seem almost as obvious as the connection we see today between human rights, democracy and peace. Tolerance, diversity, and inclusion are not political opinions. They are non-negotiable human rights, hard-fought and secured in America. I've used the prestige and influence of having been a president of the United States as effectively as possible. And secondly, I've still been able to carry out my commitments to peace and human rights and environmental quality and freedom and democracy and so forth. In my country of South Africa, we struggled for years against the evil system of apartheid that divided human beings, children of the same God, by racial classification and then denied many of them fundamental human rights. We control the world basically because we are the only animals that can cooperate flexibly in very large numbers. And if you examine any large-scale human cooperation, you will always find that it is based on some fiction like the nation, like money, like human rights. Freedom from fear could be said to sum up the whole philosophy of human rights. We should seek international support for our mutual objectives abroad, in promoting freedom, democracy, respect for human rights, and also the elimination of weapons of mass destruction. I'm sad that it's uncool or offensive to talk about environmental or human rights issues. The United States will rightfully go on deploring human rights excesses in the Soviet Union, and it is hardly likely Americans will one day espouse the communist ideology, but nowhere does it say we cannot live in peace with the USSR. In the nuclear age, there is truly no alternative. We have a moral obligation to raise awareness and educate those around us so we can create a world where human trafficking is a thing of the past, and bring these human rights violations to an immediate end. The United Nations has a critical role to play in promoting stability, security, democracy, human rights, and economic development. The UN is as relevant today as at any time in its history, but it needs reform. Cooperation and respect for each other will advance the cause of human rights worldwide. Confrontation, vilification, and double standards will not. It is time in the West to defend not so much human rights as human obligations. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.